70,000 people packed into a stadium. Bagpipes echoed, gospel songs filled the air, and tears flowed freely. But if you looked closer, this was no ordinary funeral. It felt like a political rally, a show of strength, and the start of something even bigger. At the center of it all was CharlieKirk, a young firebrand, remembered by family, mourned by millions, and immortalized by some as a martyr. The question haunting everyone there, was this truly a memorial or the launch of a new movement? From the moment the doors opened at dawn, thousands poured into Arizona's State Farm Stadium. Lines snaked outside, with young conservatives, families, and longtime supporters all desperate to find a seat. By the time the service began, nearly 70,000 mourners filled the arena, a number usually reserved for Super Bowls, not funerals. Bagpipes carried the mournful sound of Amazing Grace through the crowd, while Christian artists performed songs of faith and worship. The stage itself was lit like a campaign rally, framed with patriotic colors and massive screens projecting CharlieKirk's image. Some attendees wept openly, clutching American flags. Others raised their hands like they were at a revival. This was not a quiet goodbye. It was a spectacle, part mourning, part movement, and a signal that Kirk's influence hadn't ended with his death. It had only grown. But what truly set the tone was who walked through those doors next. At exactly 11:42 a.m., Air Force One touched down in Arizona. When President Donald Trump walked into the stadium, the entire crowd erupted. For many, this was the moment they had been waiting for, the leader of the movement paying tribute to one of its youngest generals. Trump didn't hold back. He called CharlieKirk a martyr, a man who had given everything for the cause. He spoke warmly about their friendship, recalling late-night phone calls where Charlie begged him to show up at events across the country. He just wouldn't stop, Trump said with a half-smile, admitting he often changed his entire schedule because Kirk's determination left him no choice. But then, Trump shifted into raw politics. He contrasted Charlie's forgiving spirit with his own open hostility toward opponents. Charlie did not hate his opponents, he wanted the best for them, Trump said. That's where I disagree with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. The crowd roared, but the moment left some stunned, especially since Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, had just spoken before him and struck a very different tone, forgiving the man accused of killing her husband. Where Erica spoke of grace, Trump spoke of vengeance. Where she offered mercy, he doubled down on division. The contrast between those two voices, one of faith, one of fire, set the stage for what came next. If Trump's words rattled the room, what came next ignited it. White House aide Stephen Miller, long known as one of the sharpest and most combative voices in Trump's circle, stepped to the podium with a fire that turned the funeral into something closer to a battlefield speech. Miller declared that CharlieKirk's legacy was immortalized, and then turned his focus outward. He warned Kirk's so-called enemies that they had no idea how strong the movement had become. His voice thundered as he promised that conservatives would carry Kirk's mission forward with even greater determination, framing it as a fight to save the West, to save the Republic, to save civilization itself. But his words didn't stop there. Miller drew a hard line between us and them, accusing opponents of having nothing to give but bitterness. Though the alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson, was a 22-year-old acting alone with no known political ties, Miller's language blurred the distinction, fueling the sense that Kirk's death was part of a larger war. The crowd roared in approval, but outside the stadium, critics immediately seized on the rhetoric. To them, Miller wasn't honoring the dead, he was weaponizing grief. The question lingered in the air. Was this mourning or mobilization? And yet, in the middle of that firestorm, another voice would soon rise, one that sounded nothing like Miller's, but left the entire stadium on its feet. Then came a silence that swept across the stadium. Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow and the mother of their 2 young children, walked slowly onto the stage. The same crowd that had erupted for fiery speeches just minutes earlier now rose to its feet in a standing ovation, this time out of respect, not politics. Her voice trembled as she recounted the moment she first saw her husband in the hospital, the wound that ended his life, and the heartbreak she never thought possible. She described seeing him as both gone and yet somehow still present, pointing out the single gray hair she'd never told him about, and even a faint smile on his lips that gave her the comfort that he hadn't suffered. But what stunned the crowd most wasn't her grief. It was her grace. Erica spoke of forgiveness, forgiving the man accused of killing her husband. While others had spoken of enemies, battles, and vengeance, Erica grounded her words in faith, mercy, and the belief that forgiveness was stronger than hate. Her tribute transformed the mood of the entire stadium. For a few moments, the chants and applause stopped, replaced by tears and prayer. Erica's message was clear. Her husband's life was not about division, but about faith and family. And yet, as moving as her words were, the stage would soon shift back to politics, as some of the most powerful figures in America lined up to claim Kirk's legacy as their own. No sooner had Erica stepped away from the stage than a procession of political giants began to take their turn at the microphone. One by one, some of the most powerful voices in America painted Charlie Kirk not only as a friend, but as a warrior whose legacy demanded continuation. Vice President J.D. Vance spoke first, telling the crowd that Charlie had given young people something priceless, a stake in the future. He reminded them that Kirk was not just a man of words, but of action, a father, a Christian, and an example of how to live with conviction. Then came Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who emphasized the scale of Kirk's reach. He pointed out that even overseas, leaders and citizens alike offered condolences, proof that Charlie's influence had moved far beyond America's borders. "Charlie mattered," Rubio said firmly, "and now he will matter more than ever before." Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went further, calling Kirk a warrior for country and a warrior for Christ. He reminded mourners that Kirk's fight had never been just political. It was spiritual, a struggle for the soul of the nation. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard praised him as a warrior for truth and freedom, highlighting his defense of free speech and the Constitution. Her words framed him not only as a conservative activist, but as a defender of principles that resonated far beyond party lines. And White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles closed this string of tributes by reminding the audience that Kirk was more than a talker. He was a doer. "Charlie didn't just make promises," she said. "He kept them." He delivered together. Their speeches transformed the funeral into something much larger than a memorial. It was a rallying cry, a declaration that Kirk's mission had not ended with his death. But beyond the speeches and tributes, one question loomed. How had a young college dropout built an empire so massive that his funeral could fill a stadium? The answer lay in his meteoric rise. Charlie Kirk's journey was as unlikely as it was meteoric. At just 18 years old, he dropped out of community college with nothing more than a vision and a stubborn belief that he could change the culture. That vision became Turning Point USA, a youth-driven conservative movement that started with small speaking events and a handful of stickers, and grew into a $95 million political empire by the time he was 31. By his mid-20s, he was already a household name, becoming the youngest speaker at the Republican National Convention in 2016. Within a few short years, he had a direct line to the Oval Office, shaping strategy and mobilizing a generation of young conservatives. Kirk wasn't just building a movement, he was building an army. Hillsdale College announced at the funeral that both Charlie and his wife Erica would be awarded honorary degrees, alongside a scholarship established for their children. It was a symbolic reminder that institutions, just like individuals, were ready to cement his legacy. What stood out most was how firmly Kirk had positioned himself at the crossroads of politics, culture, and faith. He wasn't just a commentator or organizer. He was a bridge between the Republican establishment and a new, younger, more energized base. His death didn't erase that momentum. If anything, the stadium full of mourners suggested the opposite. But as powerful as his political rise had been, many at the funeral believed his impact stretched far beyond campaigns and elections. To them, Charlie Kirk's story wasn't just political, it was spiritual. As the service reached its peak, the lines between faith and politics blurred into one. Christian worship leaders took the stage, their voices rising over a sea of mourners, while political speeches continued to frame Charlie Kirk as both a martyr and a messenger. It felt less like the end of a life, and more like the consecration of a movement. Pete Hegseth had called it a spiritual war. Tulsi Gabbard described Kirk as a warrior for truth and freedom. And to thousands inside the stadium, those words rang true. His death was not just seen as a tragedy, it was cast as proof that the battle he fought was larger than any election. For many, the moment symbolized something bigger, the merging of faith with political identity. Kirk's funeral wasn't simply about remembering what he had accomplished. It was about defining what would come next. His allies urged followers to carry his mission forward, to see his death not as closure but as ignition. The stadium crowd, swaying between grief and defiance, seemed to understand. They weren't just attending a memorial, they were stepping into a movement reborn. But as the final tributes ended and the music faded, one lingering question remained. Had Charlie Kirk's life ended in tragedy, or had it just transformed into something even greater? Charlie Kirk's funeral was unlike anything America had seen before. It was part memorial, part political rally, part spiritual revival. For some, it was a time to grieve. For others, it was a call to arms. And for nearly 70,000 people inside that stadium, it was a defining moment. Proof that one man's influence had outgrown his years. From Trump's fiery vow of vengeance to Erica Kirk's quiet voice of forgiveness, the service revealed two competing visions of how to carry his legacy forward. One rooted in politics, power, and division. The other anchored in faith, family, and grace. Together, those opposing tones captured the very tension that defined Charlie's life, and perhaps the movement he helped build. What's certain is this: his death did not silence his voice. If anything, it amplified it. His allies vowed to carry on his mission. His family asked the world to remember his faith. And his followers left the stadium believing that Kirk's story had only just begun. Because in the end, Charlie Kirk's funeral wasn't simply about saying goodbye. It was about deciding what comes next, for his family, for his movement, and for a country still divided over what he stood for.